Hello everyone, and welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, a subarctic summer in Churchill, Manitoba. To help ensure a smooth presentation today, please close all unnecessary browsers and internet-reliant programs, which will reduce strain on your internet bandwidth. Today's presentation is being recorded, so you'll receive a replay link in a follow-up email. Today you've joined us in listen-only mode, which means you'll be muted for the duration of the webinar. You have two audio options for listening today, through your computer speakers, or you can dial in on your phone. To switch between the two in your GoToWebinar control panel, select the circle next to your preferred audio choice. If you're calling in on your phone, be sure to enter in your PIN number. You have the ability to submit questions via the questions field in your control panel. I'll be monitoring your questions today, and at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for a Q&A with our presenter until the top of the hour. And if you're joining us on a mobile device, you may need to swipe left or right to switch between the webcam and the slideshow. All right, let's get started. Once again, welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, a subarctic summer in Churchill, Manitoba, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Eleanor Edye. Thank you so much for being here today, Eleanor. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks very much, Kendall, and I'm happy to be here and happy to see so many of you people here as well. So like Kendall said, what I want to be talking to you about today is summer in Churchill and the summer ecology of the region. Before I start talking about that, I'll just give you a quick introduction to me so you know what my history is in the area and what I do. So like Kendall mentioned, I am an expedition leader with Natural Habitat Adventures. I am from Manitoba, which is the same province where Churchill is located, though I live at the opposite side of the province. I'm not in the Arctic myself. But I have been very, very lucky. And over the course of the last year or so, I've been working at a research station in Churchill as well. So not only did I get to see kind of fall and winter up in Churchill, even over this past year, but I got to witness the start of summer this year as well. And thanks very much. Some of the researchers at the station did provide me with some photos. So the picture of the fox kit you can see here is from one of those on-site researchers. So today what I want to get into is talking about summertime in the subarctic and the ecology of the Churchill region. And I want to start off by getting into the landscape and the environment of Churchill itself, and then focusing in on some different groups of organisms. Churchill is an extremely special place and very close to a lot of people's hearts. And perhaps some of you have in fact already been there, whether it's with Natural Habitat Adventures or with another group. Churchill is known, of course, as the polar bear capital of the world. So most people who come to Churchill do come up in the fall to see bears, but it isn't, you know, of course we all have our favorite times and favorite places. I think summertime is the best time to visit Churchill. So I've got some maps on here so you can kind of picture in your mind where Churchill is if you haven't been there or you haven't looked at it on a map. It is located in the northern corner of Manitoba, Canada. And if you were to go straight up north from the US, it would be directly over North Dakota, approximately. It is relatively inaccessible. There are no roads that lead to Churchill. You have to either take the train or fly in or take a boat. And I've got the polar bear map up here as well, just to reference if you have been up here for bears. Most people fly into Churchill or again, take the train for that. And the polar bear viewing habitat that gets used is just outside Churchill, Manitoba. So it is considered to be part of the subarctic. It's not what we would call true Arctic, but it is heavily influenced by its marine environment. You can see there by the location of the star that it is right on the coast of Hudson Bay. And if we were to look at the ecoregions of North America, which we're going to do, Churchill is located at you can think of as an ecological crossroads. So again, we've got a yellow star here marking off where Churchill is on this map. And what I want to draw your attention to are all those blobs of color over North America. Each of those colors represents a different ecological region. And those regions, some of them you might be more familiar with. A lot of us who live in kind of the central area of North America, you might know like tallgrass prairie, midgrass prairie, shortgrass prairie, getting into the parklands or some more desert regions. Well, when we talk about the Churchill region, there are three main ecological regions that we're talking about. One is number 91 here on the map. So it's like a pale tan. This is known as the Northern Canadian Shield Taiga. And really what this is, it's open northern forests. It's predominantly things like conifers, so spruce, pine, as well as a few hardwood species, but it's very rocky, very boggy, and the trees don't form what we call a closed canopy. The branches never touch, so it's quite open to the sky. If we were to look to the east of that, into the more, I guess, sage green, just south of Hudson Bay there, this is called the Southern Hudson Bay Taiga. This is a very flat, open area that is almost all wetlands. And in fact, this region, which is also called the Southern Hudson Bay Lowlands, is the world's second largest wetland. Very, very large, very, very mucky. Good luck walking across it without a pair of hip waders. And then the other ecoregion that just swoops down along that western coast of Hudson Bay is the low Arctic tundra. So that is where we start getting into those true tundra, the treeless areas. And because we have those three ecoregions that meet up right at that point where Churchill is located, we get animals, we get plants, we get organisms from all of those different regions coming together. And it means it's an area of transitions. Keep in mind, of course, that Churchill is right on the coast of Hudson Bay, which is a saltwater ecosystem. So we also get the marine environment influencing this area as well. So if you were to go up in a helicopter and look down at the Churchill region from the sky, this is about what it would look like. And if you were out there looking at polar bears in the fall, you would be down there weaving your way in and amongst those wetlands. So by area, we actually are looking at something between 30 to 50% coverage of water. So there's nearly as much water on this landscape as there is true, I guess, land. Like I said, it's very, very flat, it's very, very slow to drain, and it's also underlain by permafrost, which is permanently frozen ground. And this is really why this is here, right? Not only is it really flat, so things don't drain very well, but the water can't percolate down further down into the bedrock or into the soil because it's frozen. There is nowhere for it to go. The glaciers only left this area around 4,500 years ago. This land was scraped clean, was pushed down, and it's actually still rebounding as a result of those glaciers leaving the landscape. So all of these ponds that you can see here, they're quite shallow for the most part, about 3 feet deep at the deepest point. So you will never, we laugh about, walking through these ponds. You will get dirty, you will get cold, but you're not going to drown as long as you keep yourself upright. And then in between the ponds, you can see that there's a lot of greenery and vegetation. This is not trees. This is very low-lying things like willows and shrubs and a lot of lichen. So we would group those all together as peat. So as vegetation grows in these cold environments, it does not have enough time to decompose when it dies. And that peat starts to build up and up and up, giving us higher elevation over time. So if you go further away from the coast into some older landforms, you do start to see, some hummocks, some bigger structures, but close to the coast, it is very, very flat. And as you can see, really no trees there either. Now, this next picture that's going to come up is showing you just a group of people walking on this landscape. And this is an area near the coast of Hudson Bay, just to the western side of the town of Churchill. Now, this path that people are walking on, this is not rocks that were brought in by park staff. It wasn't, or city maintenance staff. This is just the action of people walking on this ground that has worn away the vegetation in this location. And we're not talking about a big length of time that it took to do this as well. So we are looking at a very, very susceptible landscape to disturbance. It doesn't take a lot of people moving across it or vehicles moving across it to wear down those plants that have a very, very shaky hold on that rock to get right down to rock again. It's also showing you in this picture the kind of rock that underlays all of this vegetation. So we have on the left-hand side there part of the Canadian Shield, so very old granitic rock, very hard. And then you can see where these people are walking. There's a lot of ground up limestone. So this is glacial till that got dropped by the glaciers as it was melting. It's primarily like Ordovician limestone and dolomites. It does contain some fossils, and it kind of just fills in the nooks and crannies, makes up the beaches. It's one of the easiest places to learn the geology of what you're walking on, because there's actually so few rocks in the area, or so few different kinds of rocks. But you can really get a good sense here that as we start talking about the ecology of the region, how fragile it really is and how little it takes to tip the balance for whether it's plants or whether it's animals to make it a habitat that they can't grow in. Even just a couple of hundred people walking down an area is going to mean that those plants can no longer hold on. And just to kind of give you a couple more landscape shots, this is a picture of the beach along the coast of Hudson Bay. So you've got your beach with some sand, kelp growing on the sand, and then as we head more inland, we start to have those successional stages. So the sand starts getting held down by grasses and by things like sea purslane. And as we were to head more inland, we would get to what is called the tree line. So those of you who have visited areas far north in the world, or even far south, get into those regions where trees are no longer able to grow. And we see this both at high latitudes as well as high altitudes on things like mountains. And in terms of what the tree line is, it's not a hard line. There's no one single line where beyond this point trees no longer grow. It's a transitional zone, and beyond that transitional zone, you don't have any trees that can grow anymore because the landscape is just too harsh. But along the line itself, which again, I've got that star there to show you where Churchill is. So Churchill is right on this tree line. And along this line, you find scraggly trees having a hard time, trees becoming more sparse, where they start to form little copses of forests instead of unbroken forests. So what this looks like on the ground is, again, in the background, you can see Hudson Bay. So we've come inland a little bit. You can see that there's some pockets of trees that are starting to grow. These are very old trees. They have a hard time getting to this point, but they're still there. Now, in the front of this photo, which you may or may not be able to see depending on the size of your screen, we also have other spruce that are attempting to grow but aren't having success actually becoming trees. So I will show you another one zooming in here so you can again see when this picture updates that we have some trees in the area, got lots of rocks, got lots of tundra vegetation. And what those things that look like baby spruce on the ground are at the front are actually just really, really suppressed trees that can't make a living to actually become a tree. So they have been beaten down by extreme winds, by lack of moisture, by unavailability of nutrients. Various factors have conspired to make it so that even though a spruce tree, a spruce seed has landed there, has germinated and has grown, it's instead existing as this mat, almost like if you've ever seen a juniper that grows lengthwise along the ground. It almost looks more like that. And if it does send up a vertical shoot, it just gets killed off by extreme winds. So these are how you might see trees living at the tree line. They might be trees, they might be one-sided trees, or they might be this very, very suppressed form that has a term for it called a Krummholz. So as you can see, we're in an area where trees can't even make a living most of the time. So how do some of those other organisms live as well? Well, before I start showing you pretty pictures of plants, I want to just kind of point out what the climate of this region looks like. So this is a climate graph of Churchill, and you don't need to get too far into this. Things that I wanted to point out is that dark blue line represents the overnight low. And when I look at that and you kind of look at where the freezing point is, you can say, okay, if you're in Churchill and if you're a plant and you're trying to grow and you're trying to set seed and make flowers and do all the things that a plant needs to do to make its seeds and be successful, how long do you actually have before it starts to freeze again? And in Churchill, the average length of frost-free time is between 70 and 80 days. So it is very, very expected that you will have some late spring as well as early fall frosts. I was most recently up in Churchill, I guess about a week and a half ago, and there was still a fair amount of snow on the ground in some locations. So we're still going to see snow on the ground well into June, and we will likely start to see snow, you know, around about October, but you might even have snowfalls and frosts in early September. It's also fairly breezy, so we do see a lot of winds, and the kind of tan line that does a great big swoop up at the top, that is our daylight hours. So Churchill is not located beyond the Arctic Circle. It does get dark in the summer, even for just a few hours, and it does get light in the winter, but it does have very, very long daylight in the summer. And the fact that we have that daylight combined with some number of frost-free days means that those plants need to get out there, do as much photosynthesis as they can while they have that daylight, while they have that frost-free time to go on and hopefully set seed or at least get themselves enough resources to get through the winter again. And when I was up in Churchill, like I said, about a week and a half ago, one of the plants that I was lucky enough to see up there is called purple saxifrage. And this is almost always the first plant to flower in the springtime. So move your brain around a little bit, and depending where you are in the world, the seasons kind of come at different times for you. But in Churchill, springtime is often early June. And springtime, we like to joke, sometimes lasts, you know, a day or two, because as soon as the snow melts enough for things to start, you know, photosynthesizing and growing again, that's exactly what they're going to do. So in the Churchill region, there are over 500 species of vascular plants that do make a living there, as well as a whole bunch of lichens and mosses as well. So like I said, this is purple saxifrage, and it's demonstrating some of these great northern plant adaptations that we can see not just in this plant, but in other plants of the region as well. Firstly, it is perennial, meaning that it's not trying to get through its entire growth cycle in a single year. If it doesn't have the resources to make flowers one year, it's not going to make flowers, and it's going to just collect sugars from the sun and try again next year. If it doesn't have the resources to set seed, it's not going to set seed. So one of these individual plants can easily live for 3, 4, 10, 20 years. Even though they're not, you know, a tree or a woody plant, they will live over multiple growth cycles. Another thing that we see, and saxifrage is a great demonstration of this, is when you go out and you plant your garden in the springtime. You know, if you're planting annuals or if you're even seeing perennials come up, they're usually going through all of their growth in the spring. So they're making their leaves, they're making their flowers, and then they're going ahead and opening up all in a single year. And even if they're perennial. But what the saxifrage does is it actually made these flowers last year, so that as soon as that snow melted enough and the plant was exposed to the sunlight, it just popped them right open. So the flower buds were already ready. And in some plants, we also see that the vegetative growth gets ready the year beforehand as well. So they might be open to pop open their leaves again as soon as that snow is gone. This is also a very, very small plant. So you've really got to crawl around on your hands and knees to notice it if it's not flowering. It's maybe, you know, an inch and a half high for the whole plant. And what that means is that it's always completely covered by the snow in the winter. It's never exposed to those really cold temperatures, really punishing winds, and it's a bit more protected. It also makes its own protection. As its leaves die, they don't fall off. They just remain on the plant and help protect any new growth. And those old dead leaves also work to trap wind-blown dust and dirt. And this is why saxifrage is one of the first colonizers on exposed soil or on exposed bedrock. They actually are, they're rock breakers and they're soil makers. and they are great at doing what they need to do in such a phenomenal way while just being so incredibly small. Another adaptation that we see amongst some of these plants is that they actually have heliotropic flowers. And what this means in plain language is that they're flowers that move to catch sunlight. This plant that you can see here, it's the flower for the mountain avens, and it will track the sun just like a sunflower would, and that collects heat energy from the sun and makes it more attractive to pollinators. So as you can see in this photo, there is a little ant hanging out in that flower. Ants are one of the pollinators of Churchill. We do have a species of bumblebee that does live in the Churchill region, but most of the pollinators are things like ants, flies, and male mosquitoes. So not the same kind of pollinators that you necessarily have in your garden, or not the ones that we think about very often, but we do have a lot of bugs on occasion in the Churchill region. Something that people don't always know a lot about is there's actually a lot of orchids in the Churchill area as well. And I picked our biggest and showiest one to point out to you here. This is called the Franklin's Lady Slipper, and it is about just under a foot high, around 25 centimeters. And it's one of the 8 orchid species in the area. They're found kind of all around the region, and if you have somebody who knows where to find them, they're likely to be able to find a good number of them for you. So they're all pretty fantastic, and some of them are much smaller, you know, only a couple of inches tall. Like I said, this is a bigger one, about a foot tall here. Many of you will be familiar with this next species. This is fireweed, and it's not showing up like the saxifrage, right? It's not perennial. It doesn't grow from the same stalk every year. It's not small. It doesn't get covered by wind. It's not all ready to go in first thing in the springtime. But one thing it does have that we see amongst other northern plants is that it has seeds that are able to remain viable for a very, very long time. And this is a species of disturbance. If you've been up in Alaska, if you've been in the mountains of North America, even along any roadsides in kind of the northern half of North America, you've probably seen at least one species of fireweed. It is actually one of the most widely distributed plants in the northern hemisphere. So likely you've seen this. It's a beautiful plant. It's very much an end of summer plant. So we see it's, you know, late July and into early August when things are really wrapping up. And it's known as that plant of disturbance because of those long-lived seeds, that whether it's a roadbed, whether it's a fire that comes through, whether it is a newly exposed beach ridge, they're able to grow up without waiting for seeds to be distributed to the area. There are a lot of edible berries in the Churchill area as well, and these are great for humans, but they're also used by a lot of birds and mammals. So this is a crowberry that you can see here. It's another species that has very, very long viable seeds, and it's one of the many edible species of berries in the Churchill region. These are evergreen plants, so they look kind of like little spruce trees, and they act like little spruce trees as well. So they will reuse those needles or those leaves year after year until they need to replace them. And this is common amongst other of the berry species as well. So we don't see a lot of very high berries. These are all very low growing berries, where if you were to go out and pick, it's again a hands and knees kind of job to find these. But well known for being quite delicious and truly phenomenal how many berries this tiny little herbaceous plant can put out. And it's very, very important for the ecology of the area, not just for the human ecology, but like I said, it supports a lot of our bird species as well. Now, we started off by talking about trees, and before I leave talking about plants, I want to just get back into trees here. And coming back to that same Krummholz, that very twisted and bent spruce tree that I was talking about earlier. And here in this picture, you've got me for scale. So this is me in Churchill pointing at a particular tree. And if you can see to the left-hand side of me, there's what looks like a bush. This is actually the spruce tree itself. And that big thing that looks like a dead, dried out log is the original stalk of that tree. So while you can look at these, what look like very small seedlings in this region, you might in fact be looking at a tree that just wasn't able to send a vertical shoot that might be 100, 200, 300 years old quite easily. It's a hard place to make a living, but make it they do. And spruce cones and the seeds inside of them, they are not produced every year. They are only produced on those trees that are able to send out that vertical shoot high enough that they can get above the snowpack and start sexually reproducing. And this is an incredibly important food source for small animals like voles and squirrels that go on to feed some of our bigger mammals in the region. Now, I can't leave plants behind entirely without pointing out that it's not just the fancy vascular plants that we see, that if you are an animal who is making a living in the subarctic, probably one of the more important groups of plants for you as a food source is the lichen. And there are many, many lichen species in the Churchill area. Lichen are, of course, they're not a plant, they're not a fungus, they're a symbiote between a fungus and an algae. They're very, very hardy, and the fungus provides a structure, the algae provides carbohydrates through photosynthesis. This is the main food source for caribou, amongst other ungulates as well. And an adult caribou needs to eat between 4 and 8 kilograms of lichen every day over the winter, or that would be around 10 to 20 pounds of this stuff every single day. And if you ever picked it up, you know it's not very dense, so that is a lot of food that those caribou need to be taking in via the eating of this lichen daily. Now, I'm going to leave the plants behind, though of course the plants are kind of the base for our subarctic ecology and the food web. They go ahead and they feed everybody else. But I want to start talking about birds, because right now is an exciting bird time in Churchill as a lot of the migratory bird species come up. Now, Churchill actually has very, very few year-round resident bird species, especially beyond that tree line location. But the one that is most abundant, is most evident, and is most common is the common raven. And if you have ever done like the Audubon Christmas bird count, this is often done by people in Churchill as well. The only bird that's been recorded every single year at Christmas is the raven. There are other birds that will hang out throughout the winter as well, but there's only about 10 or 11 of them that you can reliably see throughout the winter. However, getting into the very, very productive summer season, when we get high days with very, very high amounts of sunlight, we get those warmer temperatures, we have close to 300 species of migratory birds that come up into this region to make use of all these resources. Oh, but of course, before I talk about the migratory birds, I did want to point out another one of the residents. This is a Willow Tarmagen, so in the grouse family. And this guy is I know, calling him a guy, I know he's a guy because it's a breeding male. You can see those inflated combs over his eyes, as well as he's in his breeding plumage. So he's got a brown head and neck and a white body. These birds will change their plumage entirely from the winter to the summer, so fully brown in the summer, fully white in the winter, and they feed on the willow buds that they are surrounded by here. So even though this is not a migratory bird, this is one that does also nest in the Churchill area, and a bird that will come up for nesting, kind of the bane of a lot of people here, is the snow goose. The snow goose is the first migrator to actually arrive in Churchill, and they tend to arrive in late April or early May, somewhere in there. Now, snow geese, if you live in an area that they pass through, you know that they're fairly destructive birds. In Churchill, they're honestly a problem species. They feed on all of that beautiful summer vegetation. But what they do, unlike the Canada goose, is that they actually feed on the roots of the plants that they feed on, instead of just feeding on the above ground vegetative parts. So they dig up the soil, they pull up the roots, and they kill the entire plant. And for that reason, they're not very desirable for people to see, but they come through in enormous numbers. In Wapusk National Park, which is a national park just to the east of Churchill, they get around 15 million snow geese every year. And in the areas that they nest, they might have up to 3,000 nests in a square kilometer, about 0.4 of a square mile. So they're filling the area. Some of them come through and they keep going further north, but a lot of them will come through, feed and nest in this region. And like we already saw, because this landscape is so susceptible to disturbance, they're having a major impact on some of the regions that they are feeding and nesting in. Now, despite the fact that we don't really like them for what they do to the landscape, they are, the young and the eggs are important food sources for animals like foxes, like yagers, which are a predatory bird, or gulls, as well as wolves and polar bears and grizzly bears as well. The two birds up here, they're both snow geese. One is just the white form, one is the blue form. So same species, different colors. We also get a lot of shorebirds and water birds that come up. One of the ones that I always look for is the Arctic tern. Now, the Arctic tern is just such a fascinating bird. It's got the longest migration of any animal in the world, and they see 2 summers every year. So they go all the way from the southern, from Antarctica, all the way up to the Arctic every single year. Antarctica is their, I guess, their summering grounds, you could call it, but their breeding grounds is in the Arctic. So we do have them breeding in the Churchill region. And just to kind of blow your mind a little bit, they live about 30 years. And over the course of their 30-year lifespan, they will fly the equivalent of going all the way to the moon and back. Just fascinating, amazing birds. But you think to yourself, if they can do this much, why on earth are they nesting on the gravel? This is their preferred nesting site. They're especially well known for nesting on beach ridges and often right at the side of gravel roads, and then they try to attack you while you try to just walk down the road. Both parents will care for the nest and for the hatchlings. The incubation period is only about 3 weeks. Then they'll feed them for about a month, and by the late summer, the adults are gone and the young will be off as well. So as you're already getting the sense, I think, that everything just happens in such an accelerated scale when we're talking about this compressed summer season that all of these organisms have to live with. I think my favorite bird to look at, like for looks, is the American golden plover. So we see this up in Churchill as well. This is they do breed in the Churchill region, so they will migrate up from Central and Southern South America, and they breed. They feed their chicks for a while, and then the adults take off. The juveniles will hang around until late summer or actually into the fall while they fully mature and feed up before they start their own migration. Another shorebird that we see is this one is the lesser yellowlegs. So both the lesser yellowlegs as well as the American golden plover that I was just pointing out, these are both birds that eat insects in the water. So they dab around with their beaks and find small insects and small crustaceans. This, you think, why is this? You're telling me it's a shorebird, but it's perched in a tree? The adults will actually perch up on trees so they can better survey the areas above their nesting sites. So very likely somewhere underneath this bird, there is an open ground nest site that they are protecting. Now, not one of the first birds to come up, but one of the more recent kind of imports to the Churchill area is this bird here. And this might be one that you have in your own backyard. This is a tree swallow. They are aerial insectivores, and they exist really only in areas that have trees. They nest in hollows in trees, or they also can go into nest boxes. So they're commonly seen in yards and nest boxes. And because they are so willing to go into those boxes, they're also one of the best studied bird species. And the reason that we now have tree swallows coming into the Churchill region beyond the tree line is because, as a study, one of the visiting researchers went just beyond the very northern limit of the range and said, well, is it temperatures that are limiting them in Churchill? Is it lack of food? Or is it just lack of nesting sites? And that study group put up a whole bunch of nest boxes and found that the birds did move in. So Churchill now has a robust population of tree swallows. And this is still an ongoing research project. And you can see here the nestling birds, they're being pulled out here because they're being banded. So these birds will be tracked. If they come back to nest themselves in future years, we will then have records of which birds were bred in the Churchill area and came back. So not only are we happy to see these birds, because it's always nice to see a new bird, but as aerial insectivores, what they do is fly around and swoop and catch insects on the fly. And as we have such a tremendous number of insects in those summer weeks in Churchill, anything that's going to take those numbers down and help out with the insects is considered to be a good thing. Now, we do also see raptors who migrate up to the Churchill area. So golden eagles do come up as well as nest. So do bald eagles, osprey, gyrfalcon, hawk owls, red-tailed hawk, rough-legged hawks. All of these birds of prey do come up, and of course some of those prey on fish, some prey on other birds. Anywhere that their prey species are going, they go as well, and they do nest in the Churchill area as well. And I will say that one of the funniest sights you might see in Churchill is seeing a family of bald eagles trying to perch on one of those scraggly little trees and doing their very best to look majestic as the tree fully topples over under their weight. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about amphibians because there are not too many amphibians in Churchill, but this is my favorite one of two. This is the Boreal chorus frog. And if you were up in Churchill in the summer, you will hear these guys yelling throughout. They have some fascinating adaptations to living in such a cold area. If you remember, I said that all of those lakes in the Churchill region, they're only about 3 feet deep. And as such, they will freeze all the way down to the ground. So in areas that maybe you live in the southern states, or even where I live, when those frogs kind of tunnel into the muck, they can quite easily find a spot far down enough that will not freeze over the winter. These frogs in Churchill will freeze solid throughout the winter, and then as things start to melt and thaw in June, they will also thaw and start their breeding process immediately. And from all studies, there are no ill effects from being completely frozen to thawing and going straight into that breeding cycle. Just fascinating animals, and seeing how all of these organisms can have adapted again to that very short season and very harsh lifestyle. Now, I think for a lot of people who are either live in Churchill or spend time in Churchill, one of the things that we're always watching for when we're on the ground are some of those mammal species that the Arctic is so well known for. And Churchill actually has 2 species of fox, the Arctic fox that you can see here, as well as the red fox. Now, red foxes, you probably have them in your backyard. Like, they're still beautiful, they're still fascinating, but they are very widely distributed around many, many regions of the world. Arctic foxes, we really only see from Churchill north. So Churchill is very much kind of at the southern extent of the Arctic fox range. Now, the fox that you can see here is in its summer colors. This is the only member of the dog family who will change the color of its pelt from summer to winter. So in the winter, they will have a thicker, fully white coat, and the summer coat is thinner and it's partially brown, tan, a little bit different by the different individuals. Now, just like every other animal and plant, they really do have to make the most of their short summer season. So foxes will breed in mid-February to April, somewhere in there, and then after a relatively short gestation period, they will give birth to somewhere between 4 and 22 pups per litter. And nobody does cycles like the Arctic fox. So they actually have the ability to have the biggest litter size of any mammal. Like, imagine having 22 babies all at once. They don't do it every year. They only do it when their prey species are very abundant. So they're well known for feeding on lemmings, but they also feed on things like shorebirds, eggs, voles, ptarmigan, crowberries. And when they're getting enough protein and enough fat in, they will have those large litters. And then when they have leaner years, when the lemming cycle is low, they will have smaller litters. They will give birth and then raise their pups in underground dens. And these dens get reused year over year because why expend energy if you don't have to? And some of these dens are actually used, as far as we know, for well over 100 years. So they're reused by either the same family or extended families. And Arctic fox are a fair bit smaller than red fox. If you just saw one running across the road, you'd think, this is a cat, what am I seeing here? It's probably a fox. And they are eaten by things like eagles, snowy owls, and red foxes. So the red fox will also predate on the Arctic fox. The red fox does face the same problems with that short season, so they really try to have their litters as early in the spring as possible to give their pups their best chance of survival when that cold weather starts coming in. So like I said, these are about 1.5 times the size of the Arctic fox. They breed around the same time, and they have smaller litters, usually between 3 and 6, up to 12, but usually not that many. They're not as well adapted for the Arctic as the Arctic foxes. So again, at that transitional area that Churchill is located at, we see foxes usually on, Arctic foxes on one side of the tree line and red foxes going into the treed areas. And look at that beautiful kit. So that photo was just taken a few days ago. This is what the foxes are doing and looking like in Churchill right now. There is a small caribou herd that also uses the Churchill area. The Cape Churchill caribou herd is around 3,000 individuals. These are barren ground caribou. So this is a photo that was taken just using a game camera by the University of Saskatchewan. The caribou are members of the deer family, and they're the only members of the deer family where both the males and females have antlers. So the males, this picture that you can see here, it's not super recent. This was a photo from the fall. So this is a male currently wearing antlers, and after the rut happens in the fall, he will drop his antlers. The females then start growing their antlers, and they will lose theirs after they give birth in June. Now, caribou have a hard time, and it's a hard life for a caribou, just like anybody else on the tundra. One of the ways that they have adapted to this is by doing what's called synchronous calving. So a whole bunch of females will migrate to the same general area and give birth at the same time. And the idea behind this is to overwhelm the predators. So even if there are a couple of wolf packs who are off hunting, they can only take so many young so that more calves will survive to adulthood. And the main predators for the caribou in this area are wolves, although they will occasionally be taken by polar bears. Now, this photo is from the Assiniboine Park Zoo. It's not taken in the zoo, but the biologists at the zoo, and that's a zoo from Winnipeg, have been doing long-term seal surveys in the Churchill area. And I actually helped out with one a week or two ago, and this is what it looked like a week or two ago. So there was still quite a bit of sea ice, even though it was early to mid-June. But this is a great time to be a seal. And it's when we can best count them as well, because they also enjoy that long daylight with warm temperatures, and they will just come out and bask on the sea ice. As that sea ice melts, of course, they will just swim, and they may bask on rocks. Now, unlike the terrestrial animals that we've talked about, we're really trying to time their pupping, the birth of their young for the start of summer. Seals have to do it while there is still ice out there for their birthing, because they give birth on the ice around pressure ridges and where there's a bunch of snow that's been accumulated. So by this point, like now, even though there's still some sea ice that's still out there, all of those seals will have already given birth, weaned them, and those seals are off doing their own thing right now. And as soon as there is no more platform for a seal to be caught on by a polar bear and those seals start swimming, the polar bears will start to make their way onto shore as well. So it's not unusual to see a swimming polar bear in the summer. Females with cubs tend to come off the ice earlier. So we've actually seen
Hey, Eleanor, I think we lost your audio here. I'm not sure if she can hear us, everyone. Just one moment, please.
oh, there we go. I hope I'm back here.
Okay, yes, you're back.
All
Thank
right,
you.
good. A little blip there. All right. I'll just redo the slide because I'm not sure where that came off. So bears do come off the ice. And because in the Hudson Bay region that we have seasonal ice cover, meaning that at some point all of the ice will melt. Females with cubs will come off the ice sooner because they are less tolerant of long swims, whereas big mature male bears will often spend as much time as they can on the ice, and this might even go into as late as mid to late August for those bears. Once they come off the ice and they make their way to land, most of what they are doing is conserving energy. So the bears that we see on land tend not to be moving around too much. Hey, Kendall, can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. Looks like we've lost your webcam though.
Okay. To me, it looks like the slides are not advancing.
Yeah, and it's for some reason showing you you're offline as well. I'm not sure why. If you want, you can just continue talking since we can hear you, and then we can go to the Q&A when you're finished.
Sounds great. Yeah, because as fascinating as bears are, they don't do a whole lot in the summer. So most of the time that we see bears on the ground in the summer, we see them sleeping. You might see them slowly moseying around. You might see them feeding on kelp. You might see them also doing things like taking a light meal of berries. They're not getting a lot of calories in from this activity. So mostly what they're doing is just trying to conserve energy during their fasting period. Now, the last animal I just wanted to kind of point out is a migrator to the Churchill area in the summer is the beluga whale, and they are in Churchill now, so they have made their way in. Beluga whales, unlike some of the other animals, they don't time their migration by what the ice is like. They're actually timed by what the day length is. So as soon as those days start to get long, beluga whales will leave their wintering grounds and make their way into the Churchill River and the Churchill River estuary. So the whales that come to Churchill, they're part of the Western Hudson Bay population, and the Churchill population is around 3,500 whales. Now, they're found usually in pods up to around 10 individuals. They like the estuaries, they like the rivers, and they are, I think you could call them one of the great migrations of the world. To be able to go out on the water and see thousands of whales surrounding you is just like nothing else on Earth. The population as a whole is around 60,000 for the Western Hudson Bay, and even just that 3,500 that we get locally in Churchill, because they're using such a small part of the Churchill River, there are always whales around, and they are just fascinating things to see. So they are extremely well adapted to the Arctic. The reason they come into the Churchill River is primarily for two reasons. One is to give birth, so it is their birthing region, and therefore those calves don't just get the warmer river water, they also get to see, they also get to be protected from other predators like the orca, which do predate beluga whales when they come into the same region. They also use they're also just following their food. So the main food of these belugas are capelin, which migrate into the rivers for their spawning. So they get food, they get shelter, they get a warmer river, they get someplace to have their babies, and a safe spot to spend the summer. So usually the whales who come up, they actively seem to be happy. It's a good spot for them, and it's always kind of fun to think about the fact that for them, it's a bit of a summer vacation, because where they go in the winter is colder and harsher and just is an area that happens to have open water for them to still be able to breathe. So with that, sorry about the lack of beluga photos. We'll hopefully be able to do some more belugas at some point in the future, because they're my very favorite, but I'm glad we got through to the bears anyway. I will hand things over to Kendall for questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, so sorry that we're experiencing some sort of technical glitch, but at least we can look at this beautiful polar bear swimming. So thank you so much, Eleanor. Before we start the Q&A, I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question today, you can submit that in your control panel under the questions field. And also, if you're interested in learning more about our summer trips to Churchill, you can visit our website, nathab.com. And you can find our contact information there, and also visit our trip page. Okay, first question. Someone is wondering about trees that you showed early on that look to be one-sided, and they're just wondering if that is from wind or if they just grow that way. Oh, I think we may have lost Eleanor. Hold on one moment, everyone. She's getting back on here. One moment. Hi, Eleanor.
Well, I'm back.
That's okay. We didn't lose you for very long. That's okay. So the first question that came in was just about the trees that you showed early on that were one-sided, and someone was just wondering how they got to be that way, if it was from the wind.
That's a great question, and I'm so happy to talk about this because I have spent years crawling around with those trees. So it is a combination of factors, but it is primarily the wind, but it's not just the wind. It's the icy particles that the winds pick up as they blow across the frozen Hudson Bay. So we have we know that no matter how strong that wind is, those ice particles can only be carried about 3 feet up in the air column. So anything beyond the top of the snowpack to 3 feet up just it's almost like being sandblasted off. So we see anything that's facing into the wind just gets, and you can feel the bark, it's just completely smooth. So it's dead bark, it's dead branches, nothing survives. But then above that height is where you start to see those normal looking trees again, because those ice particles just can't be carried that high up. So it's not just the wind, it's the ice in the wind.
All right, super interesting. Okay, there was a picture you showed of a couple snow geese, and someone noticed that there's some white plumage and brown plumage, and they're just wondering if it's based off of season or if they're two different species. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So those are both snow geese, and they're just considered different color morphs of the same species. So we call one white and one blue. And I know it doesn't look blue, but you can take this up with the birders for calling that blue. It's just that blue is dominant to white. So if a blue bird and a white bird have babies, you're going to have predominantly blue colored babies. But what studies have actually shown is that white birds are more likely to mate together, blue birds are more likely to mate together, but there are some that do cross that boundary and mate together. All a single species, just look different.
So a few people were wondering about the relationship between red foxes and Arctic foxes, and if the red foxes are out competing.
Yes, and there is active research ongoing with this right now. So what I will tell you is best knowledge for what we know as of the moment. In short, any area where red foxes and Arctic foxes can both live, the red fox will outcompete them. They are just so well adapted to be generalists. They can live in so many different environments. And one of the theories about why they can't live in the Arctic is that they're bigger, right? So they're bigger animals, they need a larger den. And as you go further north, what's called the active layer, the portion of ground that thaws in the summer and then freezes again in the winter, is shallower and shallower and shallower. So if you're a fox trying to dig a den in the summer and you hit that frozen ground, you can't dig your den anywhere beyond that. So Arctic foxes, being smaller, can use those smaller regions where they have less of an active layer, whereas red foxes are limited by that in part. But you've probably seen some of the great photography that's come out of where those species coincide. There's been many documented cases of red foxes predating Arctic foxes.
And while we're on the subject of foxes, someone was wondering about the mortality rate of the fox kits, and they're just wondering how a mom could possibly feed so many kits.
It's a great question, because not only does it completely flies off our normal mammal biology, right? So if you're ever trying to guess how many young a mammal would have, you count the number of teats and you cut it in half, right? So if an animal has 4, like a bear, you would usually expect a litter size of 2 as an average. And then foxes are just kind of like, whatever, just pump them out, we'll do our best. So what you're saying about, are they gonna survive? The more kits they have, the lower the survival rate of any one kit. And you can see this in really any animal. But as long as those resources are there, as long as the mom is in good shape and she's getting adequate food, the time when they are being exclusively nursed is only a few weeks. So as long as she can get over that hump with adequate resources in her own body and get them onto solid food, and that solid food exists, you can have decent survivalship rates even when they've got 20 kits at a time.
Unbelievable. Can't believe that. So there's a few people interested in seeing belugas. So someone here is wondering if there's an opportunity to go out in the water and watch them. And someone else is wondering about possibilities of kayaking with the belugas.
Oh, great. Yes. And absolutely. So the beluga season is, I think, one of the least well-known but most mind-blowing times when you could travel up north to see wildlife. And how the tour operators in Churchill go out to view the whales are by a combination of boats. So you can go out on a Zodiac boat, which is that rigid inflatable. They use prop guards, so the animals are kept fully safe at all times. And you can get kind of almost at eye level with the belugas. There are also some operators that use bigger boats so you can see down. And one of the tour operators that NatHab works with also does either kayaking or stand-up paddleboarding trips with the whales. So you can have a great opportunity to get into the water just like a whale does. And we've seen through kind of years of experience that whales are quite willing, and in some cases it almost seems like excited to be with like a kayak or a paddleboard, because you're almost whale sized and whale shaped at that time. So they really often come up to us in kayaks and paddleboards to say hi.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay, I'm going to end on a couple other trip related questions because there were quite a few of those. I'll combine them into one. A lot of people are just wondering, in general, when's the best time to come see the most variety of plants and animals, and more specifically, wildflowers and birds?
Okay, so yeah, even though Churchill has a short summer, we do see different things at different times. And belugas come in sometime in mid-June. So anytime that Natural Habitat runs trips or any of the tour operators runs trips, you are going to see belugas. However, July is when you are likely going to be able to see beluga calves, because the mums and the calves and the juveniles will tend to leave the Churchill estuary by mid-August or so. The males stick around for quite a while, but we will see the juveniles heading out by that point. The later in the season that you wait, the higher your chances of seeing a bear. Even though some bears are on the ground right now, and there's never zero chance of seeing a bear, the more melt we have of the ice, the more bears we're going to have on land. And then as far as the birds go, there are a lot of birds that do remain up throughout the summer. However, there are also those who migrate up, lay their eggs, feed their young, and then take off again. So you will see more birds in early July than you will in August. You will also see a greater variety of wildflowers in July than in August as well, though do keep in mind that the wildflowers are often quite small. If you want to see that beautiful fireweed that carpets the landscape, that's getting into late July, early August. But once the fireweed is up, there's not much else happening for different flowers. Most of the other ones are done by the time the fireweed is up.
All right, great. That was wonderful. And again, for those watching, if you're interested in learning more about our trip, do visit our website, nathab.com. That's nathab.com. You can find our contact information there and also visit our trip page. All right, Eleanor, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to you for closing comments.
Thanks very much, Kendall. Glad I didn't pop off for too long there. And all I really want to do is just share so much of the love that so many people have for Churchill, especially Churchill in the summer. And as special as the fall can be with its bears, seeing all of the organisms and all of the life that is doing its very best to live on the edge of the Arctic, go through so many things in such a short period of time, makes this just such a special time to see anywhere like this. So thank you all so much for joining me today, and I hope I can see you in Churchill someday.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, Eleanor, and my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.